From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Friday's shouting match in the Oval Office between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance continues to echo around the world, and it seems likely to do so for many, many months to come. Zelensky traveled to London after that debacle to meet European leaders on the weekend. They welcomed him and promised continued support. Meanwhile, the Russians are cheering what they see as a full U.S. turn to Moscow's side of this conflict in the 3-year-old war. So what comes next? Can the mineral deal between the U.S. and Ukraine be salvaged? Will Trump cut off aid to Ukraine immediately, as we're hearing from some media reports? Can Ukraine fight on, or is it doomed without American support? And what does all this say about Donald Trump's foreign policy ambitions? Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast to the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm Paul Gigot with my colleagues Joe Sternberg and Kate Batchelder Odell. Those are our questions for today, folks. A momentous day Friday and over the weekend. Let's listen to President Trump talk to the press after the meeting with Zelensky.
He's dealing with a very weak set of cards. If we sign, he's dealing with a very strong set of cards, and that he doesn't want to make peace. So that's where we are. It's very simple. I'm not looking to get into anything protracted. I want immediate peace. President Putin is going to want to make, and he wants to end it. And you saw what I saw today. This is a man that wants to get us signed up and keep fighting, and we're not doing that.
Pretty stiff marching orders for Zelensky, Kate, basically saying not just sign the minerals deal, but you have to be willing to go to what Trump seems to want is a pretty quick ceasefire, which Zelensky is reluctant, as he made clear on Friday. He doesn't trust Russia to keep any promises, and that's why he wants some security guarantees, which Donald Trump, by all signs, just doesn't want to provide. I mean, what's next in this U.S.-Ukraine side of it? Not the European side, but the U.S.-Ukraine side.
Well, I think the next step, and I think the diplomatic triage, is trying to salvage the minerals deal and trying to get that back on track. I mean, the defenders of the minerals deal were arguing that, okay, this at least gives the U.S. a stake in a sovereign Ukraine and its future. It gives us a way to justify continued support. And so I think getting the minerals deal back on track is the first step to containing the damage here. And beyond that, obviously, there's a lot to work out. I mean, you can't just have a ceasefire without knowing what the security guarantees are for Ukraine not to be invaded. But I do think you could salvage this situation by first getting that minerals deal done and trying to get on a better track so that hopefully Trump can pivot to putting all of this pressure on Putin instead of just a one-way negotiation with the Ukrainians that we're seeing now.
That assumes, of course, that Trump wants to put pressure on Putin, which so far I don't see any signs of. I mean, zero, negative. And what's fascinating to me is after this meeting and the way it blew up, what you saw was all of the Republicans, nearly all of them was in Washington, basically lining up and blaming Zelensky as the instigator of this event in the Oval Office, but also as the main obstacle to peace in Ukraine. Let's listen to Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the weekend.
The question now is, can we get them to a table to negotiate? That's our goal. Don't do anything to disrupt that. And that's what Zelensky did, unfortunately, is he found every opportunity to try to Ukraine-splain on every issue. Then he confronts the vice president. When the vice president says the goal here is diplomacy, he immediately jumps in and challenges the vice president. Well, what kind of diplomacy? So we all understand, okay, that Putin is not going to be an easy negotiator in this regard. We all get that. But we have to start the process to see if something is even possible.
You can dispute, Joe, whether or not Zelensky was the real instigator there. I read more J.D. Vance was the vice president and then kind of encouraged, and then Zelensky argued back. But I think Zelensky was in any event wrong, just from a sheer self-interest point of view, to take that bait. I would have said, no, thank you, Mr. President. You're the greatest. You're fabulous. We'll get peace. Let's sit down and talk. And that's what Trump wanted to hear. And then you can work out the details behind closed doors. But it's this idea that what I hear from the administration is attack Ukraine, blame Ukraine, and then where's any countervailing pressure on Putin? Do you see any? Do you hear any? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the big part that's missing all of here. I mean, I'll say at the outset that my interpretation of a lot of this weird and often very creative defensiveness of Trump and J.D. Vance that you've been hearing from that camp over the weekend, I interpret as a sign that they have kind of realized that they may have gotten a little out of hand in that meeting themselves.
You think so?
Well,
I hear no regret in that. What makes you say that?
The clapping is a little loud, Paul, though.
if you look at some of the MAGA fever swamps, particularly on X, formerly known as Twitter, which we will do so our readers don't have to, I've just been struck by the creativity that people are applying to coming up with explanations for how Zelensky had misbehaved in this meeting. So you're never going to hear an apology from Trump or Vance for this event, but I do wonder if at the back of some minds out there, there is a certain amount of sensibility to the fact that it just didn't look good to have the U.S. president exploding in the way that he exploded, no matter how he was provoked by someone who they all claim is so insignificant. And I think that, the key problem that they're running into here, which I think is hanging over all of this, is the dawning realization that if a peace deal were easy to negotiate in this situation, it would have happened already. And so I think that you have this problem where you get the sense that there's a feeling that we've tried backing Ukraine for 3 years and that didn't work. So maybe if we come at this from the Russia side, that will solve this problem and get us into some sort of ceasefire or permanent peace agreement. I mean, that is a theory, but I think that it bumps up against the reality that Russia is the side that created the war. And one of the reasons that this has been going on for so long is that the West, the US, and Europe have not really created sufficient disincentives for Putin to continue it over the past 3 years. And I'm not quite sure that the Trump team has reconciled itself to that reality yet.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how Europe is responding to Friday's shouting match in the Oval Office when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on our daily Opinion Wall Street Journal podcast, Potomac Watch, and I'm here with Kate Batchelder Odell and Joe Sternberg. We have been writing for a long time that this war was going to have to end with some kind of negotiation. Ukraine was unlikely to reclaim all of its territory, or even much of it, and there had to be some kind of negotiated solution. But if they're going to have that, your point about Russia seems exactly right. What pressure will there be on Putin to make any concessions other than the fact that the war continues to be costly for him in manpower and the economy? But on that point, Kate, there are at least in the press now that say that they're unconfirmed, but say that the administration might cut off aid to Ukraine imminently. There are still lots of arms in the pipeline. Congress would have to, pass more aid to get more down the road, but there's still a lot of aid and equipment that is still moving to Ukraine based on the decisions that were made at the end of the Biden administration. If the President Trump cut that off, that would put Ukraine in a much worse situation. And then you have the reports over the weekend now confirmed that Defense Secretary Hegseth ordered the NSA to stop offensive cyber operations against Russia. And you have Elon Musk, who has some sway in the Oval Office, saying U.S. should get out of NATO. And of course, hanging over that is, what would happen if Elon Musk cut Ukraine off from the Starlink satellite system, which is so crucial to Ukrainian self-defense? Now, I'm not trying to be too alarmist here. I'm just saying that these are things that are bubbling up in the press in the wake of that debacle in the Oval Office, because people are thinking, what's going on here? And this removal of the offensive cyber operations against Russia, which has not stopped its cyber operations against us, is, let's just say, odd.
It is odd. I mean, the Russians are obviously very committed to their strategy in Ukraine. In 2024, the Russians took an area about the size of Rhode Island, and they took about 400,000 casualties for it. That's data from a CSIS think tank report recently. I mean, that is just an enormous amount of casualties for inch-by-inch gains of territories. And we haven't heard yet, what part of the country that they've seized since 2022 are they willing to concede as part of a ceasefire? Nothing. That story on cyber operations is also, I think, deserves more attention. Now, Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, was saying on the Sunday shows over the weekend that this was not part of their discussions. So I think there is reason to pump the brakes on maybe exactly what's going on there. But the U.S. has typically had a cyber posture of going and engaging with threats and shutting them down before they attack us. So you don't wait until a non-state actor or somebody on a network is trying to attack a hospital in the United States. You engage with that first. And so that has been a very good thing for the United States. And if they're backing off of that, I think that would be very negative for our national security. And it doesn't seem to be paired with any larger concessions from the Russians. I mean, that's the point we keep driving here. Are the Russians willing to tolerate a European peacekeeping force? We don't know. Are the Russians willing to tolerate the United States continuing to arm Ukraine as they have been, as some kind of backstop after the war ceases? There are simply no Russian concessions on the table yet. And so there may not even be a deal to be had here if the Russians are not willing to come to the table. But so far, we're only pressuring one party in the negotiation to give stuff up. And we saw that explode on Friday.
I want to clarify one point here. You said that Mike Waltz on the Sunday show said that the cyber decision was not related to the Ukraine-Russian negotiations. Was that the point?
He was asked about whether we had stopped our cyber operations, and he said that hadn't been part of our discussions.
Part of what discussion? You mean the White House discussions? There's some ambiguity there. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, there's ambiguity in exactly what the United States is stopping doing in its cyber operations. And there have been some denials by a DHS arm about how the way our cyber posture has or has not changed. I think it would be very negative if that's true and we're not going out on these Russian networks and looking for threats anymore. But it's not clear yet exactly what changes in our cyber posture have been made.
Okay. Of course, those are all secret anyway. They don't really disclose those except through really presidentially sanctioned leaks at some point.